We're going to allow some people to join in as we get started, but I'd like to welcome you all tonight to our presentation. Thank you for joining us. Please note that this presentation is being recorded. Again, thank you for taking the time to join us for a very important presentation, Parenting in a Pandemic, with special guest Dr. Michael Cassano of Dragonfly Psychological Associates. Again, my name is Dawn Tucker, and I work with the Hatboro-Horsham School District as the K-12 Student Assistance Program Coordinator. I support the social emotional work that we have within the district in areas of social emotional wellness, in the areas of prevention, intervention, support, and follow-up. I would like to extend a special thank you to those that made tonight possible. The Hatboro-Horsham School District for continuing to support these topics and discussion. The Hatboro-Horsham Educational Foundation for making the funding and opportunity to collaborate with the Dragonfly team. And most importantly, our elementary school counselors for the insight, collaboration, and support with these discussions in our classrooms. We have received a grant from the Educational Foundation to allow us to bring in these guest speakers from Dragonfly virtually into our 5th grade classes, as well as make this evening's presentation possible. I would like to take a few minutes just to introduce to a few of our participants for this evening. Rose Walsh is our elementary school social worker, and she's here to share a few of our resources.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here tonight. So I'm going to show just some resources that we have on our website, the Hatboro-Horsham website. We have some social emotional well-being page. You can go there and there's just a list of mental health resources, community resources, tips for self-care, and then another mental health and community resources that is found on that social emotional well-being page as well. There is a COVID-19 resources page, and then we are also implementing parent guardian support video series done by me with one executive functioning video up there right now and more to come. And then there is also some community resources that are on that page as well, on the social emotional well-being page. And that's all that I have for right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Rose. We are able to work with a school grant to receive the supports of an elementary school social worker. So we're really excited to have Rose join us this year. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Carner, our elementary school school counselor at Crooked-Billett, that really helped to bring this opportunity to life, just to share a few words about the work that we've done and have been able to offer to our students.
Absolutely. So I'm Sarah Carner. I am one of the school counselors at Crooked-Billett Elementary School. And this fall, we had the opportunity to work with Dr. Cassano's colleagues, Dr. Cassano through Dragonfly Psychological Associates. And 2 of his colleagues named Sam and Christine came in and did 3 lessons for every single 5th grader that we have at in our elementary schools. The lessons focused on big emotions, focused on how big emotions feel in our bodies and how we manage and regulate those emotions. And we really focused on 2, anxiety and frustration, which we felt were the real prevalent feelings that our students and ourselves have been feeling during this pandemic. So we looked at different situations where they would feel those emotions, talked about how they would cope with those emotions, and made sure that every student left with 3 or 4 coping mechanisms that they could use when they had those feelings. Our big goal now is to go into every 5th grade again and review that information. We also want to prepare them to reteach that information to our 3rd graders. And as we know, older students teaching younger students is one of the most powerful ways we can get messages across. And it's also such a wonderful way for students to remember the material and practice their coping mechanisms. And so this has been a wonderful experience. We are so lucky to have had Dr. Cassano, to collaborate with him and his colleagues, to be able to do this with our students during such a difficult time for our students, our staff, and our community. So we're really looking forward to the next step in going back in and reteaching our 5th graders and 3rd graders.
Thank you, Sarah. And at this time, I'd like to remind everybody that this presentation will be recorded and that we'll have the opportunity to see it on the district website. And with that, I'll turn it over to Karen Cantor, our principal at Simmons Elementary, to introduce our presenter for the evening.
Thanks, Dawn, and thanks to all of you in our virtual audience for taking some time to join us for this important topic. Dr. Michael Casano is a licensed psychologist in the state of Pennsylvania. He has extensive experience and utilizes a variety of therapy techniques to address concerns related to parenting challenges, including ADHD, learning and homework problems, aggression, sleep difficulties, anxiety, and depression. Dr. Casano will provide practical tips on how to support your child through their emotional ups and downs and discuss evidence-based parenting strategies that promote emotional competence in elementary school-age children. Welcome, Dr. Casano to Hatboro-Horsham.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have a chance to, to continue this partnership. I think this has been it's been really rewarding for our team, because this is, we're going through our version of this year. And I mean, we as a team always feel very passionately about helping kids and teens, just live the best life they can and be ready for the next stage of development. And of course, this year has just felt like all of those themes are so amplified. And, for a while early on, we just felt so, I think, sidelined and helpless. Like, how can we help? We feel like we should be doing something. And this felt like a really great chance to partner in a way that had some meaning, like on the ground, where these things are happening. I mean, anxiety and frustration, like, yeah, that's what this year is, right? I mean, among other things. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm just going to dive in. I've got probably way too much that I want to talk about. But I'll try to streamline in terms of boiling it down to some things that all parents can really be thoughtful about and intentional about. A lot of this is going to be kind of aspirational, right? These are all things that as parents, we can be thinking about, like, oh, I'd like to do a little bit more of that, or that sounds really great. I can't do it all the time, but when I can, I'm going to do this. So what I'm going to cover is, it's going to come from a few different research bases, and I'll point that out when we get there. But this is going to be, I think, some things that anyone can walk away with thinking about, things you already do well and how to keep doing them, and then also things to be a little bit more intentional about going forward. So let me share my screen, make sure we're good to go. Does this look good, Dawn? Just thumbs up? Okay. All right, cool. All right, so first, just very briefly, in the name of making sure everyone realizes they're not alone, these are the themes we're seeing, and we're seeing them a lot. We work with a lot of families with a wide range of things that are bringing out, but this is really what we're looking at. Loss and grieving, big time. Low self-esteem. And by the way, I'm not just talking about our kids. I'm talking about kids and parents here. And in many cases, anyone who's really spending a lot of time thinking about how to help kids out. Loss and grieving, low self-esteem, the cluster of depression, irritability, agitation. I should have put anxiety on that list too. Certainly when it comes to getting work done, whether it's work, schoolwork, virtual work, issues of inattention, concentration, lack of motivation. They're pretty much universal experiences as opposed to, exceptions to the rule. Working independently, a lot of the structures that we typically rely on to feel productive and be productive over long times, they're absent, or at least they're inconsistent. And with everyone living together, working together, all the above together, family conflict. I mean, if there's one real universal piece, things can be good for a certain amount of time, and then it can be really tough to maintain that. And so, when we think about the larger themes, this is what we're up against. And much of what I'll talk about tonight are principles of how parents influence their child's emotion development. And they're always true. These are true of any time, and they're more amplified now. And so it's a both and when we're talking about it tonight. So what I'm going to talk about here is I'm going to talk about 5 specific ways that parents influence their children's emotional abilities. And we can break these abilities really down into 2 skills that come up on a regular basis. The first skill is being able to identify emotions. So when I'm feeling something, can I identify it? Can I put language to it? And first and foremost, this is really a language task. Do I have, I mean, we can see this in very young kids before language comes on board and kids feel distressed or they feel angry. We see it in their behavior. They can't tell us in words, so we see it in their behavior. And you can see that that's something that grows across the lifespan. Our ability to put how we feel into language is something that is a developmental emergence over time. The second set of skills, are what we typically call coping skills. Whether I know what I'm feeling or not, can I identify things that are going to be helpful? And helpful could mean problem solving. It could also mean just riding out a really tough emotion that I can't do much about right now. And research over many decades has shown that there's very specific ways that parents influence these processes. Now, I should also say that there's a big caveat here. The ability to identify feelings and cope with feelings is also highly determined on biological development and neurological development in particular. I mean, there's a reason why, we can't teach a 3-year-old to just take a few deep breaths, do some meditation, and they find their moment of Zen every day, right? There are significant neurological, barriers getting in the way of being able to do that. And frankly, for most adults, if we're, at least for me, honest, I often still lack the ability to access what I know that I should be doing in any moment in time. So even the endpoint of this developmental trajectory is not emotional mastery, right? It's really being able to understand how our emotions work, have enough tools in our toolkit to be able to get most of the stuff done we need to get done. And I think that's a goal that a lot of times we forget as parents. A lot of times as parents, again, I can speak for myself here. It feels like my goal is to help my kid eliminate their emotions as quickly as possible and get on with the work or get on with whatever was going on, or get off my to-do list so I can go back to doing what I needed to be doing. So with all that in mind, we can look at some of the things I'm going to talk about today in the larger developmental context of sometimes, no matter how good we do as parents, our kids are kids and our teens are teens, and they're still going to be up against big feelings that may outmatch their abilities. And that's perfectly normal. And certainly that can be extra true in a year of a pandemic. So these are the 5 things I'm going to talk about, and I'm gonna just give you sort of the headlines. Each one of these has lots of nuances and twists and turns and different flavors, and so in many ways, as I'm talking about each of these sources of influence, I think what I encourage you all to do is just reflect on, what is this like in our house? What are the things that I'm aware of that I do? Are these things that you're doing intentionally, or are these things that largely are reactive? Most parents, whether it's been in my past life doing research in this area, or more recently doing, in the therapeutic context, when parents talk about what this is like, they're shooting from the hip. They're reacting to things. They're making it up as they go. They kind of know there's probably some great way to handle this, and they're pretty sure they're not doing it. That's what it typically feels like. And that's okay, that's normal. I mean, I think part of what we can do here is let's name some of this, let's label some of this, so that maybe you can be a little bit more intentional. In fact, what I just described is also emotion competence, right? It's, as parents, these are emotional moments for us, right? When we're doing everything that I'm going to talk about tonight, you have to probably remember that we're aspiring to do this while you're also hungry, angry, lonely, tired, right? There's some version of stressed, which makes it twice, if not 3 times more difficult. So let's dive in. The first way that parenting influences kids' emotional development, it could be summarized in the sense of an emotional climate, right? Now, it's not a lot of words here. You kind of look at the pictures, right? Just ask yourself, what does it feel like in my house right now, or this week? If I had to sum it up in terms of the emotional climate, what would the forecaster be saying? Tomorrow is going to be sunny, blah, 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 whatever. Just a gist overall summary answer can tell a lot about what's going on, because when the emotional climate in a household is, let's just say unstable, right? Unpredictable. Everyone in the house has to have a little bit more defense up, a little bit more energy spent, sort of, looking out for that sort of unpredictability. So there's how unpredictable our climate is, and then there's also, how warm or cold or, rainy, stormy it can be. Now, also parents don't have complete control over the climate. But it would be something to consider. And a lot of times what this looks like in most families is a real good, parents taking a good look at the entirety of what happens. What does the schedule look like in our house? How busy are we? What are some of the things that we typically like to do that we've either lost track of or has fallen off the table? This doesn't have to be rainbows and sunshines every day. That's not the goal. I think part of the goal can be how to make it more predictable. And then certainly how can it warm up at times, or at least how can we foresee it getting better? At least in our group right now, we're seeing a lot of conversations that have the flavor of, okay, we've made it this far. We can't believe it's been 12 months, right? Something like that. And then finishing the sentence with, but it kind of looks like we might be able to get this back, or we might be able to look forward to this in the near future. And even that speaks to an emotional climate. It's kind of the emotional climate of my life. It looks like, a warm front's coming through. We can look forward to that. And in the meantime, we can hunker down a little bit longer, look how far we've met. So these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about with the emotional climate. This is probably the most foggy and vague version of what we're going to talk about here, but it is something to consider, because if the climate is unstable or really stormy, the rest of what I'm going to talk about today is harder to do consistently. All right, second way that parents influence. This is usually more obvious to see. Parents as emotional role models. We as parents say a lot of stuff to kids. We give lots of wisdom, whether they like it or not. And for every hour of wisdom we share, the kids probably absorb about 1 second of it. In contrast, the role modeling, what do you as parents look like when you're managing emotions? That typically corresponds with your child's emotion regulation more closely. And so unfortunately that means, you're gonna have to look in the mirror and say, okay, you've probably had those moments where you said, oh boy, I know who that is. All right, that looks familiar to me. And it's probably safe to say that rather than kids following your advice, right? This is what you should do when you feel sad, or this is what you should do when you feel frustrated. It's probably more likely the case that they're going to notice what you do and role model it, which doesn't mean they're pretending to be you. It means this is how emotional information is often transferred. And we've seen this time and time again, and it's not just the human species. This is in many ways how emotional skills get translated over time. In addition to just it being demonstrated, one of the other things that you can see in the second point here is showing your emotional work. One of the things that's a huge part about the work that I do when I work with families is improving the communication in families around emotions. A lot of kids don't believe that parents have the same feelings that they do as kids. And one of the reasons is because a lot of what parents and adults do when we regulate emotion happens internally. Nobody sees it. It's this amazing thing that kids either think we didn't have the emotion to begin with or have no understanding about what we did to manage it. And usually there's opportunities that are missed on a regular basis for parents to just openly talk about things that are happening in their life, right? Now, when this can be done in a controlled way, it can be a story that you're telling. Hey, this happened at work to me today. I got furious. This is what I felt. This is what I noticed inside. And this is how I handled it. And this is how it went. Those are moments that are incredibly important, right? It allows kids, it does a few different things simultaneously. One, it actively tells a story about how someone managed a feeling. But probably even more important, you've established yourself as someone who gets it, right? Because especially if you're talking about a feeling that you know your kids have had, all of a sudden they realize, oh my gosh, they feel the same way. A lot of kids will start showing that they're looking for this by, in a moment when they feel really comfortable, asking parents, hey, did you ever feel this way as a kid? Right? When you were in 5th grade, did you ever get nervous talking in front of the class, right? Kids will often ask that question. And if they're not asking it, they're probably afraid to ask it or don't think that the people that are around them can actually, answer that the way they need to. So the more that you show your emotional work, the more you establish yourself as an adult who's a place to go. And that's a huge, huge opportunity for kids to learn. A final note on here is that, I posed this question, what standard are we holding our kids to versus ourselves. And I'll, again, I always try to reflect back on myself first. When I'm thinking of myself as a parent, it's way different than when I'm thinking as a clinician. When I'm as a clinician, I can think, well, what would be a reasonable expectation for a kid under these circumstances of this age, blah, blah, blah. But when I'm at home and one of my kids is having a bad day, it's inconvenient for me, or it makes me feel like a failure, or it's causing me to feel something. And what it makes me really wanting to do is it wants me to turn their feeling off so that I feel better in some way. And that's actually holding my kids to a higher standard than me, right? If I can't tolerate this feeling, if I can't tolerate being bored or being frustrated or being anxious, is it reasonable to expect that my kids would be better than that, right? And I think every once in a while, just pausing and asking yourself, what standard am I holding my child to right now? And is it reasonable? Does it match what I could be? If I was in my kid's shoes, could I handle that scaled up developmentally? So those are what I mean by parents as emotional role models. The third pathway is having conversations about emotions. This is going to sound like it's not as big of a deal, and I'm telling you it is. And again, this is one of these things where to be really intentional about it goes a long way. Emotion regulation, coping skills. This is largely the stuff that we mean when we say, I want my kid to learn how to cope. What we really mean is we want our kids to have their knowledge about emotions in linguistic form. We want it to be something that they can talk about. We want them to be able to identify with language what's happening in the moment and do something about it. Whether they say it out loud is irrelevant, right? So that means that we need to turn our emotional world into language. And one of the best ways kids learn how to do this is talking about emotions or hearing people talk about emotions, right? Now, part of this is about how emotions work in time, right? I mean, I tell you, I can teach almost any kid lots of stuff about their emotions. And when they're calm, they can ace the test, they can ace the quiz, they can teach the class, right? But in the moment, they lose all ability to think clearly about their emotions. That's normal human being stuff. But the first step is actually to build that knowledge base. And that happens a lot of times. What parents can do is it can help in terms of predicting future events, right? So let's talk about what's coming up. I'm noticing you're getting anxious. You're getting a shot next week. Let's talk about that, right? Previewing future emotional events, looking into their emotional future. Probably even more available to us is the debrief after emotional events, right? Many times what happens emotionally at home doesn't feel like it goes well. Like it's yucky, it's ugly, it's messy. And whether or not families go back in time and talk about that and debrief, that's a huge missed opportunity. And again, it doesn't have to happen every time, right? And you have to be in a good place to be able to have those conversations and have them feel productive. But when a kid gets to go back in time and debrief about something that happened, talk about what was feeling, you can share about what you were feeling, right? Many times everyone has an emotion that they lost control of, right? Or emotion that came out in a way that they wish came out differently. Those are invaluable. And again, for two reasons. One, lots of information is able to be conveyed about how emotions work, the consequences of expressing in a certain way, the identification of a coping ability that may have been missed, but also the repair of the relationship, right? There's not a single long-term relationship that survives because no one ever had conflict. Long-term relationships, friendships, close, intimate relationships, family relationships, they endure because people can work through emotions. And it's the debrief after. Hey, this is what happened. I'm sorry. I meant what I said, but I did not say it in the way that I wanted to. I'm sorry that hurt your feelings. Are we cool? That goes a long, long, long way. And it allows kids to be able to look at their emotions differently. When kids don't get a chance to do that, they're ashamed of their feelings. They think their feelings are the problem, right? And that also means that they try to not let themselves feel it anymore, which doesn't work. So the debrief is a great place to look for something to work into. And again, the debrief can happen 10 minutes, a day, 10 days later. It's not really when, it's that it happens. And that kids often can expect it to happen. The next point I wanted to bring up is it's the power of the narrative and also validation. As parents, a lot of times what we really want to do in the moment is have our kids get past an emotion and then start fixing the problem, right? Or have our child be able to manage their feelings on their own. It's just the instinct that's guiding a lot of what we're doing as parents. What I might encourage you to do instead is focus more on first validation, right? Rather than try to get rid of the problem or tell them why they don't have to feel that way or why, I still catch myself saying this all the time. My youngest is almost 4, and she'll say something is scary. And I will catch myself saying something like, that's not scary. It's nice, whatever, safe, whatever, it doesn't matter. But what I'm really trying to say is, I understand why you're feeling scared because you're feeling that that's not safe, but it's actually not dangerous. And here's why it's not dangerous, right? But if I skip over the part of just validating that it feels that way, I'm really jeopardizing a conversation not being as useful as it could. And if I always do that, then what a child will feel is that this person never says that what I feel is okay, or never says that what I feel is correct. And in any relationship, if we feel like someone will tell us that we're wrong in how we feel, we're going to slowly, if not quickly, stop talking to them about our feelings. So I can see why you think that's scary, right? Tell me, what is it about that looks scary to you? Or maybe for older kids, look, I can see you're anxious. Tell me a little bit more about what do you think is going to go wrong? What do you think is that you're not ready for? Let's talk about that, right? And then the narrative, right? We're telling a story. It looks like you're feeling anxious about this, right? Let's look, how do you think this is going to play out? What are all the different ways you could handle it, right? Help your kid try to identify the different ways they could write a script, right? Either of something that happened and making meaning out of it, or planning into the future and how they may be able to manage that. Giving them some space to identify some things. Now, again, this assumes you've got lots of emotional bandwidth yourself to have a lengthy conversation. Every once in a while, you do need to just say, hey, knock it off, go to bed, right? Sometimes that has to happen too. So these conversations, they're really valuable when everyone can kind of dig deep. And as long as you're having some of them, the rest of the time you can say, hey, knock it off, go to bed. Or we can talk about this tomorrow. It's not an all or nothing, and certainly not every emotional event our children have deserves a lengthy, validating conversation. It's just sort of making sure that this is happening on a continuous basis. A final note is using emotion words. One of the things that's a really fundamental thing to do, and it's interesting if you go home over the next few days and just look for this. How many emotion words are said in the home on a regular basis? Actual classic emotion feeling words. We know from many, many, many studies that households that use more emotion words have kids that have higher abilities in the emotional realm. They're better at talking about their feelings. They have better coping skills. They're usually better regulated, right? Now, it's not that simple. You can't just go home and say anxiety, 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 right? It has to usually be purposeful. But think about how many stories you tell or how many things you talk about where emotion words could be used. And that would be a place of leaning into that and thinking, is there a way that I could incorporate some emotion language into this? And still have it be authentic. It can't be sort of this weird forced thing. But just reflect on that. How many emotion words does my kid get exposed to at home on a regular basis? Okay. So we talked about climate, we've talked about conversations, we've talked about role modeling. The fourth way is going to seem very okay, we're talking about parenting now. Consequences, right? So there's the emotion that happens, and then there's how the emotion comes out. And many, many times emotions are behavioral, right? So what does my kid look like when they're having this tantrum? A lot of times, look, it's built into parents' DNA to say, consequences probably matter, right? My kid has a temper tantrum and I give in, that's probably going to mean more tantrums, right? We learn that pretty early on. So what I will say is that this logic has to be really, really planful, because many times, again, this goes back to this question of expectations. The idea of something that's a consequence, which could be a positive consequence or a negative consequence, they only really work the way we think they do when someone has some degree of control over the behavior in question, right? So there are going to be examples of tantrums that young kids have where they are completely out of control And over time, it doesn't really matter whether or not we rewarded it or not. It's just out of control behavior. And what we do might help it stop or continue. But in terms of learning over a long period of time from consequences, that only really happens when someone has some degree of control. So what I would often think is that for a lot of the big feelings that we're talking about, the answer to that question is probably no. Big feelings, almost by definition, are out of control. And so a lot of times the consequences that make sense are more likely to be useful over a long period of time if they're natural and like assistive, right? So we're helping our child regulate, right? So like the idea of a timeout, for example, I mean, there's a lot of different ways of using it, and I won't go into all the nuances, but a lot of times, when a parent gives a timeout, it's like, go to your room, come back down when you're calmed down, right? And that can sometimes feel like, a punishment, because in many ways it is sort of saying, stop it, go to your room before you can come back here. But actually at its core, there's something really useful about that. It's not always delivered that way, but what are we really saying? If we're really slowing down and we're saying something, we're basically saying, it looks like you're out of control right now. And I think one of the best ways of you getting in control is to take yourself out of the situation, go to a place that's a different setting, do whatever you need to do up there, let time pass, and then come down and we'll try again, right? Now, a lot of times it's like, that's it, I've had it, go to your room, right? So sometimes it's in the delivery. But when I say in the moment consequences, a good in the moment consequence should be more about helping our kid regulate in the moment than be thinking about this like long term. I can't let him keep getting away with this bad habit of emotional behavior. Even though there may be some degree of utility in that over time, we're probably going to make an error of thinking our kids are in control of something that they can't. After the event consequences, those consequences should be more about the repair of relationships or preventing the same thing from happening in the future, right? So a natural consequence would be, look, yes, your sister really drove you crazy, and I'm sure that was really annoying, but you can't hit her. You've got to make that right. Go apologize for that, right? So like that repair is a natural consequence. It teaches a really important skill, which is that we often will lose control of our feelings and treat our loved ones poorly. We need to get really good at knowing how to handle those moments. Then prevention. How is this going to go better tomorrow, right? And that prevention consequence can also lead back into the emotional conversations, right? So a lot of times we have a chance of previewing an event. Hey, remember yesterday while you were waiting for dinner to start? That's when you and your sister got into it. How are we going to have this go better this time, right? That puts some scaffolding in place that lets kids have greater access to coping when they're so motivated, right? So consequences can also be used that way. I mean, sometimes consequences are incentivizing better emotional behavior, for lack of a better term. And there are often really good times and places to use that. I would say that the only time that's really useful over, in development is when you can see that a kid's really, like, it's emerging. They're starting to be able to control something about their emotional behavior. And that's a place of really encouraging them. I do a lot of work around sibling conflict. Two siblings that just push each other's buttons and they're really good at just poking, right? And in those moments, it's a total emotional game, right? The urge to drive the other one nuts is so much more powerful than getting yelled at, right? It just is. It's how we're wired. So how do we incentivize doing better than that, right? And a lot of times it's having siblings work together. The two of you can figure out how to get along. Here's this thing that you both get access to. Here's this privilege, right? And what you're doing there is you're incentivizing each of them swallowing a little pride and doing something different with their emotion. Maybe they are just going to naturally take a few more breaths, or they're just going to choose something else, make a better choice. Right? So much about emotion regulation is actually making an easier choice ahead of time that doesn't put me into a situation that I can't control. That's real. I mean, having willpower over our emotions is kind of a myth. Like, that's what a lot of people come to me for. Like, teach me how to overcome this big feeling I have. And a lot of times I'm like, yeah, you probably can't. When it's that high, you got to ride it out. you have a way better bang for your buck if you learn how to prevent getting into those situations in the first place. And in many ways, we can use incentivized consequences that way. I mean, we do this all the time, usually as parents, in the form of a threat, right? Right? You guys don't knock it off, this is going to happen. Switch that up, try the incentive. A lot of times you can get a lot of kind of additional steps developmentally out of someone when you frame that incentive as something that's emerging. Okay. The final pathway we'll talk about tonight, this is parents as coaches or consultants. So there's a really big body of literature that kind of looks at styles of parenting when it comes to emotional development. And I'm going to oversimplify it, but a lot of parenting behavior can be put into one of two categories. So this is like in a moment when our kids are going through an emotional experience. What are we doing? How are we acting? What's our posture? And the research really puts parenting behaviors into two categories: coaching or dismissing, right? Coaching is like, I see that my kid's going through something right now. Here's an opportunity for them to learn from this experience, gain some knowledge, try some things out on their own. Dismissing is, I want this to stop right now. This is toxic. I've had enough. This needs to end, right? And you can probably think about your own repertoire, like, and most parents do both, right? I mean, so the reality is it's not like you're one or the other. You're likely to fall into both categories. And every once in a while, it's okay to dismiss in a moment in time. But if you do too much dismissing, there's lots of negative consequences that can happen over a longer period of time for our kids. So the idea here is to think, can I be more of a coach? Can I be more of a consultant, right? Rather than let me control this, let me dismiss this. And just like any coach, coaches are involved in lots of things, right? So if we think about a coach of any sports team, coaches are involved in all of the training, lots of different pieces of it, but they're not on the field, right? One of the big reasons why parents end up dismissing is that parents feel like they're on the field. They're going through it too, right? This comes up a lot when parents talk about our homework, right? Our kids have got work to do and parents are using a possessive pronoun, right? They're on the field. We're going through this too, right? And obviously in some ways that's legitimate. But in terms of helping our kids learn how to deal with their emotions, it's really important to have some separation between our child's emotional world and what we're going through. Another way of saying that is we have to learn how to tolerate some degree of our child's experience, especially negative stuff, especially struggle, especially failure, right? It is also one of these automatic reflexes that parents have that when our kids are in distress, we're motivated to relieve that distress, right? I mean, that's how it works as infants, right? I wouldn't be saying this to, a parent of a newborn, like, you know what, here's a chance for your kid to be resilient. Let them wait for that bottle. Like, no, that's not a thing, right? So we have to obviously tailor this. You can see this last point, knowing how to do this for your child is a moving target, will change as they get older, is personality dependent. But what's true about all parenting here is that the greater ability we have to be able to tolerate our kids' inner experience, their negative experience, and put some distance between ourselves and their experience, it gives us a chance to observe what our kids are going through, help them without doing it for them. And that coaching leads to so many great outcomes over a long period of time. This literature is actually really rich. And it basically would suggest that when parents can find the right pocket of coaching on a regular basis, their kids have a greater emotion vocabulary, they have access to better coping skills, they do better academically, they do better socially, they actually have better physical health outcomes. And then when they become adults, they're more likely to become coaching parents. And again, this research is decades old and it's really, really powerful stuff. There's some great books about that too. And, if I were to condense it all down, the first step is in those moments when our kids are feeling a big feeling, ask yourself, am I able to tolerate this right now? Right? And again, it doesn't have to be every time, but if you can say, you know what, I'm going to let this child feel this right now, right? I don't think I put it on this particular slide, but one of the things that's the word that I think is helpful is toxic. Many, many times, parent anxiety and parent stress comes from feeling like something that our kid is doing is toxic for them. It's not just like not great, it's actually harming them, right? One common one that parents feel all the time is screen time, right? It really does feel like if I have to watch my kid on a screen, it feels like something really dangerous is happening. Their brain is burning. Something really, really developmentally problematic is happening. And I can tell you that negative emotions are one of those things. Watching our kid be lonely, watching our kid feel really scared, it triggers that process in us where we really do think that something is wrong. Now, I'm not advocating for like having our kids be tortured by, chronic, long-term anxiety, stress, depression, blah, blah, blah. That's not okay. But momentary, periodic emotions are perfectly normal. They are non-toxic. In fact, they are highly important and helpful moments that are usually more important than the thing they were actually upset about, right? So like, for example, the struggle with, let's say, homework, right? You got a kid who's just, they're tanked, they're exhausted. They really want to be prepared for tomorrow, but they don't have it in the tank. They know they're not doing well in this assignment. They're feeling lots of crummy things. That moment is so much less about whether or not they understand the academic concept. It's more about their relationship with struggle, their relationship with frustration. And if, as parents, we can realize that that's actually what we're coaching. We're not helping them get this work done. We're helping them manage this really big feeling, right? And oh my gosh, the amazing miracle of time away from something stressful, right? I mean, so much of what we really want our kids to be able to do is just be able to take a break and get back on the field, right? I mean, what does a great coach do? They manage the clock, right? They know when to take timeouts. They know when the momentum's shifting. They know how to do that, right? And that's the role we can play, right? That also means we have to be unattached to other things that parents are often concerned with, right? So, I mean, in this example, we're talking about our kids being academically ready, right? Learning this skill. What I will say is that these are really, really hard decisions to make because we're asking to weight one of those more than the other, right? Is it finishing this math work right now, or is it helping them deal with their frustration right now, right? Doesn't always mean it's mutually exclusive, but if we take a big step back over the course of any given grade, kids have multiple chances of learning their academic skills. They have multiple chances of learning their emotional world. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing at once. But especially, we bring back in the narrative, right? What a coach can do is say, hey, look, listen, we've been here before. I know you know how to do this. You're not feeling confident right now, but all I can think about right now is how you did this the past 3 nights. Let's remember what you did then that we can do a little bit more now, right? And then they say, I can't do it, blah, blah, blah. All right, you know what? Let's take a time out. I'm coming back in 5 minutes, right? Sometimes you have to scaffold it that way. But again, can't do that if you can't tolerate that moment too, right? So it puts a big burden on parents and their own emotional regulation abilities. But this coaching piece is really powerful. So I talked about these 5 ways that parents influence emotional development and how they're extra important now. This absolutely ties into these concepts of resilience and grit, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, read about, TED talked about. This is this sort of elusive idea of what do we really want from our kids. We really want to teach them how to be resilient. We want them to foster that grit. And to be real, it's rare to see it in person, right? So like this idea of this grit kid, this resilient kid, for a parent that's watching their kids struggle, especially in a year like this, it often seems like it's not there, which doesn't mean it's not growing, right? There's no way to learn how to be more resilient or to achieve grit without struggle. And like I said in the last slide, we can't have struggle without parents making room for it, right? But also knowing their kid, where's that line? Too much struggle isn't helpful, right? But the right kind of struggle, the right developmental struggle, that's the piece we're looking for. And we actually would like to give our kids space to swim in that, right? Yeah, it's rocky, it's not always pleasant, but that's what we need our kids to be able to experience in and to be able to debrief before, debrief after, talk it through, maybe get some good cheerleading in the middle of it. And you know what? Sometimes just saying, hey, tonight's not the night. Let's tell your teacher that you weren't able to get it done today, right? These are the productive struggles over long periods of time that resilience and grit grow out of. But it's a very, very long process. And it's certainly not a process that I would expect to see most kids achieve in elementary or even middle school. Most of the time, if we see it in the form that we want to see it in, we're talking late adolescence, early adulthood. You need a lot of, part of resilience and grit is confidence. And confidence comes from true accomplishment, right? We can periodically talk ourselves into being confident about something that we have some experience with, but real resilience and grit comes from accomplishment, which you can only do over a long period of time. And we can facilitate that by helping our kids build a narrative about who they are in the face of struggle, right? One of the ways where this, by the way, also comes up a lot is when kids start getting grades or feedback about things. What's really interesting is to hear what they think about their own feedback, right? Whether it be a formal grade or whatever. You know, oh, this is what the teacher had to say about that. How do you feel about that? That's a really interesting starting place to have conversations that are really conversations about resilience and grit. Because what you might find is the kid says, yeah, that was really easy, I barely tried. So they got this great feedback for not having to try, right? Us giving positive feedback as parents in that moment kind of misses the point, right? The kid's sort of feeling ambivalent. I didn't have to try, it was really easy. In contrast, you know, how do you feel about this feedback? You know, I didn't do so well. Okay, well, what do you think you actually did okay? Right? Okay, great. Yeah, keep doing that. What do you think you need to work on? Okay, great. That's a resilience conversation, right? So even in the face of some perhaps less than positive feedback, there's a real productive conversation that allows us to look at some of the things we could have done better. It's growth mindset language. You know, that kids, it doesn't come to kids naturally. You know, some of these other points here, I think we can also tie back in. Most struggle, is non-toxic, but it can often feel toxic to parents. This is really something I want y'all to just to look for and think about, right? This idea of, is this emotional experience dangerous for my kid, right? And I would say go in there with the bias that the answer is probably not. And then say like, well, yeah, okay, so if I think it's toxic, but it isn't toxic, what am I bringing into that moment? And how does that play out? What does that teach them, or what does that not teach them? Right? And this is the dilemma of us spending a lot more time at home, a lot more time together. Our bandwidth, our patience is thin, our ability to tolerate is lower, right? And if this describes your family, like if you're having these moments going through this, like, oh my gosh, we're doing none of this, or we used to do this, I don't feel like I can do it anymore. I will also tell you that 1 year is not going to make or break. 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, it's not going to happen, right? That's not how trauma works, right? You can always turn this around. You know, I'll go back to the word I used before, which is the narrative, right? A good story, a good narrative, one that we remember, one that we go back to, is not easy. It's not this, wow, things were easy at the beginning, they were easier in the middle, and they were really easy at the end. That's a boring story. A great narrative is, you guys remember when this pandemic started? You remember how we handled that? You remember those first few months? Yeah, that was rocky. And then you remembered how we figured this out, right? That story is so powerful because it tells so much about the truth, about struggle. It wasn't easy. It was hard. We didn't do it great the first time. We didn't do it great the 5th time. How did we figure this out? Micro versions of that can happen every day, every week, right? One of the things that I think is critical for families, especially at time of higher stress, is to look at every day as an opportunity to finish a narrative, right? How did today go? What went well? What didn't go so well? Remember the morning? Yikes, right? Can we laugh it off? Can we move on? Can we think about tomorrow? Can we come back together, right? That can feel like a successful, resilient story that included struggle, that included something messy, right? Now, this third point here that I'm second to the end, everything that I'm talking about here also, as I said, this is aspirational, and it also has to be tailored to individual kids, individual families. And I can't give you the rule book, I can't give you the algorithm. and knowing how and when to intervene. It does not have to be a solo task, right? One of the questions that comes up a lot is, when is this not okay? When is this toxic? When is this not normal? When should I go get help? And I would say, in general, we have as a culture, this idea that great parents don't need help. Great parents know it already, or great parents read enough books to figure it out, right? And then they also, by the way, don't just read the books, but are emotionally like transcendent, so they can do exactly what they're supposed to do at every moment in time. And that's just not true. It's not even close to true. It's silly. And it promotes this idea that, you know, the best parents are the ones that are completely self-sufficient. It doesn't make sense. It's not true. It doesn't work. I have a really, really strong reaction against that. We should be showing our vulnerabilities to each other. We should be talking to other parents. We should be talking to teachers. You know, in many cases, if you're concerned about something in the emotional realm for your child, talk about it with your child's teacher. Bring it up. This is another set of eyes who sees a lot of your kid at school on a regular basis. They may see a totally different side. I can't tell you how many kids do so well at school and then fall apart at home. And no one quite knows what the story is. Even the kid doesn't know. Like, who am I? Am I the kid at school, or am I the kid that melts down at home? You know, it doesn't have to be solo. So partner with people, talk to people, you know, consult with somebody. There's lots of, you know, pediatricians, you know, therapists, counselors, lots of people who would be more than happy to be a part of the team, part of the conversation. I mean, obviously I'm biased. This is what I do. But, you know, a lot of times a little bit of consultation goes a long way. A little bit of just sharing with another parent goes a long way. And I think fighting that stigma of feeling like I'm supposed to figure this out on my own, or I'm supposed to do enough reading or enough classes to nail this thing. Look, the resilience and grit literature is, you know, it's some of the most interesting like stuff you'll read about or see videos about. And there's very, very little on how to make it actually happen, right? And there's a reason for that. It's because a lot of people just don't know how to do it, right? That's okay. Lean into it and embrace that. So consult with teachers, consult with other parents, find other helping professionals, especially if you are at your wit's end and you're really feeling like my self-doubt is becoming part of the story here, right? I don't know if it's toxic or not, but I'm assuming it is. So I'm jumping into every situation and I'm getting messy and everyone's fighting about it. Those are moments where it feels like more often than not, it's getting messy. That's a great line to say, you know what, let me bounce this off somebody else. Let me kind of cross into that vulnerable territory, you know, and see where that can go. All right, so I just threw a whole bunch of information at you, and this is a topic that I feel like I could talk for hours and hours now about, because I really do. You know, I'm very passionate about it, and I love to be able to be collaborative and thoughtful about this as much as I can, and at the same time trying to be humble about it, because, you know, I don't want anybody to think that if you follow all this to the T, everyone's happy all the time. No, in fact, like, it shouldn't be that way. We need to be real. We need to be able to connect about this. And I hope tonight, you know, at least sort of, you know, maybe identified some things in your home that you know you do well and you want to turn the volume up on that, or do a little bit more. And maybe some other things you want to just kind of, you know, experiment with, try a little bit, aspire to. So I appreciate, you know, being able to spend this time with you. Dawn, the team, is there any other thing I could speak to tonight before we sign off?
Dr. Castano, thank you so much for your presentation this evening. Panelists, any other questions before we conclude tonight? I do appreciate.
I think he covered everything. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
This was a great opportunity. We're really, really thankful for this ability to work together and collaborate. Dr. Castano, any final words? And if not, I'll conclude our presentation for this evening.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
So again, I'd like to just say thank you to everybody that was able to join us this evening. Thank you for attending the presentation. To all of our panelists, our counselors, our superintendent, Dr. Ebeslag, and all of the administrators for recognizing the importance of these important topics and conversations, recognizing social and emotional well-being, these ideas that you shared of productive struggles, resilience. If you do have any questions or would like additional support, we do encourage you to reach out to your child's principal, counselors, teacher, our staff teams. We have lots of people who are available to help support you and your family. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening. And a reminder that this presentation has been recorded and will be available for you to view later. Thanks so much and have a great night.